Hi, this is Roger Molvar. Welcome to my presentation on China. Today we live in a provincially oriented, ethnocentric world where the center is often thought of as being located in Western Europe or in the United States. But that's rapidly changing as China emerges as a new super economic power. Many Westerners view the Chinese people focuses less on their 5,000-year civilization than on the more recent Beijing 2008 Summer Games. Interestingly, the year of the Olympics also marked the 30th anniversary of the beginning of reform and opening up in China, and both events were important identifiers of progress. No longer is China the drab Maoist-style society so ingrained in Western consciousness. There is now a visible change in the people's fundamental outlook and spirit. The major coastal cities especially tend to reflect a new sense of confidence and enthusiasm. China is important because it has the world's largest population, the world's largest rapidly growing middle class, and the world's largest export market. In terms of U.S. national interest, it's the number one exporter to the U.S. and the largest lender to the U.S. It has also recently surpassed Japan as the world's second largest economy. This presentation will provide a very brief overview of China and of the Chinese people. In doing so, it will reflect on opportunities for reaching a segment of these people with a sustainable witness. Specifically, in America and other North American nations where they are studying, Chinese students are an extremely strategic audience for the gospel. Further, these internationals, by virtue of their education and family connections, represent China's future leaders. China has always been important to me because of my interest in China's history, its people, and more recently, my business there. For centuries, China has been a leading civilization, at some points outpacing the rest of the world in arts and sciences. In 1978, after years of state control over all productive assets, Mao's successor introduced the beginning of market-oriented reforms and decentralized economic decision-making. The resulting change in the economic lives of the Chinese people has been significant. While there have been considerable reforms and dramatic improvements in the standard of living of people's lives, personal and social freedoms have only increased in small increments. There are many other such inconsistencies. China is still a highly socialistic society, but now with clear class distinctions. While China continues to be in the midst of this huge transformation, one which is critical to the people's shift from an agrarian to an urban society, there's a long road ahead. China must wean itself away from a nearly 30-year reliance on low-cost assembly workers that build and export less expensive products. To continue, China's socio-economic transformation must be built on two new foundations, according to a key speech delivered last year by then-President Hu. Substantial increases in domestic demand and consumer consumption, and a new industrial structure centered on manufacture of higher value products are key, according to Hu. In terms of business, I began consulting work in January of 2011. I worked with a Seattle-based global architecture firm that had a joint venture with a Chinese firm, making it the largest commercial building architect in China. Relations were not going well with the JV, largely because the China team did not feel valued and respected by corporate. I had the great privilege of building bridges over a 2-year period, traveling between the two groups of people. While we live in a global village, what do Americans and Chinese really know about each other, and how do they know it? What images do we have of each other's culture, society, and state? Where do these images come from? Why do some perceptions endure and others change? How do these perceptions affect the decisions and actions of governments, businesses, civic groups, and individuals? Americans and Chinese have increasingly negative impressions of each other's countries, many of which are formed out of prejudice and as a result of stereotypes. Yet we are visiting each other's countries more than ever, becoming more intertwined, and are working cooperatively in many different ways to address pressing social, economic, and environmental issues. The remainder of this presentation will examine many of these important topics, including how increased exchange can affect perceptions. To understand a country and its people, one must first understand certain foundational elements, including geopolitical, religious, and cultural realities. Geographically, China is the fourth largest landmass in the world and borders 14 countries. China is generally regarded as being divided into two parts, the Chinese heartland and the non-Chinese buffer regions surrounding it. This area is further defined by a line called the 15-inch isohet. This meteorological term denotes areas with a precipitation level of 15 inches, running from Inner Mongolia in the north to Tibet in the south. East of this line there's more than 15 inches of rainfall each year, and west of the line there is less, often considerably less. The vast majority of people live east and south of this line in the region known as the Chinese Heartland, home to the ethnocentric Han, historically considered the core Chinese people group. The Chinese heartland is divided into two parts, northern and southern. Typically, Mandarin is spoken in the north and Cantonese in the south. These languages share a writing system but have virtually no overlap in the spoken language. A ring of non-Han regions surrounds the inner heartland. If you look, you can see this beginning on the left with Tibet, moving up to Xinjiang province, which is the home of the Muslim Uyghurs, then over to Inner Mongolia, and in the northeast to the historical Manchurian area, all buffers to the core heartland. It is generally understood that two quite different approaches to life and the universe, that of Aristotle and Confucius, have maintained themselves for thousands of years. These approaches include a significantly different view of social relations and the nature of the world. The collective or interdependent nature of Asian society is consistent with Asians' broad contextual view of the world and their beliefs that events are highly complex and determined by many factors. The individualistic, interdependent, or rather independent nature of Western society reflects a focus on particular objects in isolation from their context. The Chinese orientation toward life is shaped by a blending of three different philosophies: Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. All three of these philosophies share concerns about harmony, holism, and the mutual influence of everything on almost everything else. These orientations help explain why the origins of Chinese philosophy undervalued the concept of individual rights in favor of an interdependent group mindset. Communication styles differ dramatically between East and West, so it's important to consider culture and context. Hall, in some of his classic works, defines culture as the way of life of a people, the sum of their learned behavior patterns, attitudes, and material things. Culture is often subconscious, an invisible control mechanism operating in our thoughts. Context is defined as the information that surrounds an event. It is inextricably bound up with the meaning of that event. In terms of values, communication in China follows certain styles. Typically, the style values those who don't interrupt, who think in silence. It values those who aren't big talkers and those who use little body language. It values a lot of tradition and the power associated with tradition, values punctuality, it's hierarchical, has high respect for elders, and is collectivistic. Most of these styles are quite different from those in the US, so showing respect for these values is important. The cultural backdrop differs dramatically from east to west. Personal relationships in many Eastern countries are often formed for very pragmatic reasons. It's quite common for people to work together to achieve a goal and help each other out as friends based primarily on the benefits they can provide to each other. This does not mean that people in this part of the world won't enter into friendships with another person because they like that person. It also does not mean that everyone is looking for an angle. It simply means that relationships here are often based on reciprocity, a sense of mutual benefit or shared identity, and this occurs far more than in the West. Duty often trumps all. A Chinese person will be polite to a grumpy old uncle not because he likes him, but because it is his filial duty to put up with him. A person will help out a younger classmate or a junior member of her company because she has a responsibility to do so, based on her higher status in the group. Friends may be called upon to help in ways that are quite inconvenient to them, and they are expected to offer assistance when it is asked for. Saying no is not really an option if you are a true friend. However, if your friend adheres to the same cultural values, you'll be richly rewarded for the effort you have made to help your friend. An organic accounting of favors granted is kept, and it is necessary to repay the giver of the favors with a reward that may surpass the value of the favor initially granted. These two dynamics, duty and reciprocity, do come into play in Western countries, but not to the extent that they do in the East. What does the future hold? To fully grasp China's future direction, it is essential to understand its new Western oriented middle class. A huge wave of increasing affluent consumers will constitute China's urban majority in less than a decade. The rapid emergence of this prosperous, digitally savvy, individualistic, and sophisticated class of consumers is creating opportunities and challenges. Let's now discuss the important mobilization scenario related to international Chinese students. Research increasingly points out the importance of upstream focused communications and how important it is to effectively influence upstream policymakers. China Outreach Ministries, initiated by Reverend Stephen Wang, a pastor originally from China, reaches students and scholars in North America with the gospel and prepares them for Christian leadership and witness. The group's focus is on giving Christ to China's future leaders by serving them in loving, practical ways, leading them to faith in Christ, teaching and discipling them, and equipping them to effectively live out their faith in families, communities, and professions. My sense is that this sort of outreach to Chinese students and intellectuals who study in North America is worthy of support. I thank you for listening to my presentation, and I welcome your suggestions and comments.